Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, a weekly show with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Trescott. Today I'll be dispensing with our normal format, and we're just going to talk about coronavirus and the many impacts that are starting to be felt throughout the aviation industry. And not only will we talk about how it's impacting the airlines, but we'll also talk about how it's affecting general aviation, especially charter flights and flight schools. But we won't be talking about the virus itself, how real the danger is, or precautions that you may want to take to avoid catching the virus, as there are many sources of that information. And I do expect for our next show that we'll be back to a regular format, which includes general aviation news, my updates, followed by a pilot education or safety topic, and listener feedback and questions. So if you love that format, don't worry, it will be back soon. Now, last week in episode 139, pilot examiner and Patreon supporter Jason Blair gave me a mock private check ride. So if you have a check ride coming up, or if you just want to review your knowledge for an upcoming flight review, you may want to check it out. And if you are new to this show, I just want to let you know that Aviation News Talk was recently ranked the #1 aviation podcast in Apple Podcast. And if you'd like to join our many listeners around the world, please click the subscribe button in whatever app you're listening to us now. That way you'll get notified when new shows are available. But of course, it costs nothing, $0 to hit the subscribe button, so please do it now. Now, before we get to the news, let me tell you about my experiences on Monday morning, March the 9th. Normally, I drive about 20 minutes on local freeways from my home in Silicon Valley to the Palo Alto airport, arriving about 9 a.m. Many local high-tech companies, including Facebook, Google, and LinkedIn, announced last week that employees should work at home. And while this may be an overreaction, consider this. Over a quarter of all known cases in California are right here where I live in Santa Clara County. And this morning, the first death in California was reported, and it was in the hospital just a couple blocks from my home. Now, I didn't have any flights scheduled today, but I wanted to drive to the airport at my normal time to see what traffic was like, and it was shocking. As I emerged from Highway 85 onto Highway 101 northbound, I shouted out an expletive that could be summarized as "holy crap." I was merging onto 5 lanes northbound that are normally bumper to bumper and virtually stopped. But today, the highway was almost empty. Traffic was lighter than I've seen in the 32 years I've lived here, except perhaps around 1 a.m. in the morning. It was totally unbelievable. At the airport, I stopped in at my flight school where they said that the training schedule was very light today. I had one flight scheduled today with a listener who was traveling to a conference nearby and who wanted to experience flying in a Cirrus with me, but his conference was canceled, so he canceled our flight. After stopping at the flight school, I headed over to take a walk at Bixby Park, since between flying airplanes 5 days a week and spending 2 days a week putting together this podcast, I just don't get enough exercise. Now, the park is underneath Palo Alto's traffic pattern, and normally I listen to a constant parade of aircraft in the traffic pattern practicing touch and goes. But today, during my half-hour walk, just 2 planes landed. So my walk was eerily quiet. While I welcome that as I enjoy the quiet, I knew it meant that coronavirus is having a major impact on every aspect of aviation. So let's get started. Coming up with the news, the airlines are hurting. United is trimming their schedule up to 20% and postponing new pilot training classes. And suddenly, the airlines don't really need all of those 737 Maxes that have been grounded for a year now. And jet fuel prices are dropping, but probably not enough to help the airlines. And all of these problems are already leading to talk of tax relief and another possible bailout for the airlines. And in Europe, airlines are purposely flying empty flights for a bizarre reason we'll tell you about. And Lufthansa has considered grounding their entire A380 fleet. Here in the U.S., flight training is down, with reports of some flight schools temporarily closing over coronavirus concerns. But if there's a bright spot in all of this, it appears that some charter operators are booking more flights, at least for now. All this and more, and the news starts now. From sfgate.com, United trims their schedules up to 20%, imposes hiring freeze amid coronavirus fears. United Airlines, which controls 45% of the market at San Francisco International, is the first U.S. carrier to announce it's cutting back its flying due to plummeting demand. It likely will not be the last airline to do so, as coronavirus fears put travel plans on hold. In addition to the flight reductions, United said it will offer employees unpaid leave, delay salary increases, and implement a hiring freeze, moves which will reverberate in the local economy, as the airline employs more than 13,000 in the Bay Area. And here's an update to the story. Shortly after United's announcement, JetBlue said it would cut capacity by 5%, leaving open the possibility for deeper cuts, as well as making money-saving moves such as voluntary unpaid leave, canceling meetings and events, and enacting a hiring freeze. And from CNBC.com, they reported last week that United is now offering some wide-body pilots a month off in April at a pay rate for 50 hours a month, which is lower than the roughly 80 hours pilots would normally work on those routes, according to Todd Insler, United captain and chairman of the United branch of the Airline Pilots Association, in a note to union members. He said the reduction in block hours has resulted in lower line values and fewer flying opportunities in some fleets. He said, we are preparing for the possibility of further reductions to our schedules as the virus spreads. Going back to the SF Gate article, United said it will trim its April schedules in the United States and Canada by 11% and its international schedules by 20%. The carrier is also prepared to extend those cuts into May if necessary. United may reduce the frequency of the service or utilize smaller aircraft. That means travelers should be prepared to accept schedule, seat, and upgrade changes as the situation progresses. On the bright side, the drop in demand means that those still flying will be more likely to snag upgrades or find empty seats or rows next to them on board. United's 20% reduction in international flying includes the previously announced capacity reductions to select Asian cities and the suspension of service to Shanghai, Beijing, Chengdu, and Hong Kong. And Lufthansa Group said today it will reduce short-haul flying by 25% and has grounded effectively 150 jets out of its fleet of 770, including 25 long-haul aircraft. British Airways has made similar cuts due to lack of demand. In related news, Delta said it would waive change or cancellation fees on international reservations for March flights no matter when they were booked, a much more liberal policy that could be adopted by other carriers. For domestic flights, Delta, United, American, and other carriers are still only offering fee waivers on flights booked during March, but not on reservations made earlier. And from QZ.com, QZ stands for Quartz, coronavirus means airlines don't need those grounded Boeing 737 MAXs after all. 2 months ago, United Airlines was in a bit of a pickle. The U.S. carrier, which was forced to cancel dozens of daily flights in the wake of the Boeing 737 MAX crisis, was looking ahead to months of variously swapping out planes, canceling flights, or finding larger aircraft to work around the shortage of planes. Before the crisis, says Seth Kaplan, an aviation analyst at Kaplan Research, many airlines were missing airplanes relative to what they expected to have, and they weren't able to fly the schedules they expected to. Some leased aircraft, others made do with their less efficient models. With summer on the horizon, peak season for travel, many carriers had already anticipated being squeezed or having to cancel flights. Now, he says, the opposite is true. Airlines are finding themselves with too many airplanes relative to consumer demand. No airline would have chosen what happened with the MAX, of course, both in terms of the tragedies themselves and the extremely expensive grounding that has followed. But given the reduction in consumer demand, some carriers may see the situation as a silver lining, albeit a slim one. If you're United, it's not such a bad thing that the MAXs haven't yet been delivered, said Kaplan. It's kind of a blessing in disguise not to be paying for those additional 5, 10, 20, 30 airplanes, depending on the airline. In addition to its 14 grounded MAXs, United has more than 100 on order. More generally, the 1,000 or so airplanes missing from the world's skies have left the industry smaller than it would have been. Having big, expensive aircraft just sitting around can be hugely costly for airlines who are under pressure to use those valuable assets as much as they can to make them pay their way. But no one knows how long this state of affairs will remain the case. It's all very messy, says Kaplan. And though airlines don't need as many airplanes today, the situation may be totally different in just a few short months. Either way, for the first time in a while, Boeing isn't the greatest problem plaguing the industry. And from simpleflying.com, struggling airlines could benefit from lowest jet fuel prices in 2 years. The price of jet fuel has today hit a 2-year low as the pressures of the coronavirus sends economies plummeting. Kerosene has become a whole lot cheaper for airlines to purchase. In fact, since the start of the year, prices have fallen by almost a quarter. But is this enough to save airlines who are struggling as the virus expands around the globe? Over the past month, news of the coronavirus has been in the headlines daily. Today, the impact is being felt even more so as the outbreak begins to swell in nations outside of China. For airlines, it's been a tough month as demand for travel plummets, and so do their stocks. However, there is a small silver lining in the midst of all that chaos. As global stock markets drop, commodities around the world are dropping in price too, including the cost of jet fuel. In fact, Cirium, that's C-I-R-I-U-M, reports in Flight Global today that jet fuel has now reached a 2-year low, giving airlines a little breathing room during these difficult times. Airlines are painfully aware of fuel prices, with aviation fuel making up around 25% of the overhead of most carriers. For some, the cost of fuel can soak up as much as 32% of their overall cost, so in theory, a drop in this cost could mean a more profitable operation. However, many airlines do something called fuel hedging. This allows them to buy forward contracts for fuel supply at a previously agreed price. This helps mitigate fluctuations in the price of jet fuel, making it easier for airlines to budget. It's a big win for airlines when fuel prices go up, but unfortunately also means they don't benefit when the bottom drops out of the market. With the coronavirus epidemic showing no signs of abating anytime soon, fuel prices are expected to continue to trend downwards. although suppliers in the Asian regions are likely to look west to sell their products, as the economic shutdown in China has left limited opportunities to sell it there. Overall, this will only serve to drive prices even lower. While a cut to one of aviation's biggest overheads will bring a bit of welcome relief for airlines struggling with the impact of the coronavirus, it's doubtful this will be enough to combat the drop in demand. Asian airlines in particular are facing up to trying to survive one of the worst years on record, and we're still only in February. With the coronavirus only just starting to really affect European aviation, it remains to be seen if all the air carriers make it out on the other side unscathed. And from Forbes.com, Air France-KLM faces $1 billion fuel hedging loss as oil prices fall due to coronavirus. The one positive factor in an otherwise negative short-term outlook for aviation is the rapid decrease in oil price as concerns grow about the coronavirus. But the airlines will not evenly benefit from a reduction in the cost of fuel, requiring airlines to pay the hedged amount rather than the cheaper market price. The difference, a fuel hedging loss, can be large. Air France-KLM Group is facing a fuel hedging loss of $1 billion at current pricing. Even after hedging losses, its net fuel bill will be lower than last year's. But Air France-KLM could be disadvantaged against competing airlines that are less exposed to hedging and, all other factors aside, can offer cheaper tickets due to lower fuel inputs. Air France-KLM hedged 65% of 2020's expected fuel needs at around $65 a barrel for Brent crude as of mid-February. That helped Air France-KLM as Brent reached a 9-month high of $69 in early January. It was a short-lived gain. Brent dropped to $53 in early February as China significantly reduced economic activity while containing the coronavirus. The spread of the virus and loss of market confidence in North America and Europe saw Brent close at $45 on March 6th after OPEC Plus failed to agree on a production cut. As fuel prices decreased, Air France-KLM's paper hedging losses for the year increased. The group on February 14th projected a $300 million hedging loss when Brent was $57. That expanded to a $650 million loss on February 28th when Brent was $52. At $45 of constant, the group's pre-hedging fuel costs could be under $4.5 billion, but hedging losses could give a final bill $1 billion higher, though still below 2019's $6.2 billion, which comprised 23% of the group's operating cost. Even by the volatile standards of oil, the pricing outlook is uncertain. Goldman Sachs expects this low fuel price environment could continue into April, while others predict $30 fuel or even $20. An increase in fuel prices would reduce Air France-KLM's hedging losses. If fuel rebounds to pre-coronavirus prices, hedges will become gains and reduce Air France-KLM's net fuel bill. Last year, the group booked a $50 million fuel hedging gain. And from the WashingtonPost.com, airlines, travel, and cruise industries hurt by coronavirus could get tax relief from the White House. The travel and tourism industries are facing their worst crisis since the 2001 terrorist attacks, prompting White House officials to consider deferring taxes for the cruise, travel, and airline industries to stem the economic fallout from the coronavirus, according to people briefed on the discussions. The discussions are a sign the White House is grappling with how to respond to an outbreak that officials have publicly played down. The talks remain fluid and are preliminary. The tax deferrals for the travel industry are being considered as airlines cut back on routes and warn about declining ticket sales. Hotel chains are struggling with vacancies in Asia and are bracing for similar waves in the United States. Business travel is falling, and trade shows, music festivals, and conventions are being canceled from San Francisco to Chicago to Austin to Miami. Families and college students are reconsidering spring break excursion and distant summer plans. Other countries have already enacted tax relief for their hardest-hit industries. On Sunday, Italy announced a tax credit for any company that has seen revenue decline by more than a quarter. That is on top of Italy's announcement last month that companies and individuals in areas affected by the epidemiological emergency would be granted an extension on spring tax filings. It's not clear how U.S. relief would be administered or whether the president's own hotels could be beneficiaries. Administration officials also disagree on the extent to which some of these measures could be undertaken without Congress. On Friday, White House economic advisor Larry Kudlow confirmed that the industry is considering timely and targeted federal interventions to help workers, businesses, and industries most vulnerable economically to the outbreak. Perhaps on a large scale, some of the sectors might need some temporary assistance, Kudlow said, adding, "We don't want to act prematurely." His comments were the administration's most definitive public acknowledgement yet that U.S. companies have been hurt by the coronavirus. Speaking on CNBC, Kudlow specifically pointed to the airlines, saying they are in trouble in some of their numbers, but he stressed that the White House was not concerned about widespread economic damage, a stark contrast to most independent economists and investors who see growing risk of a recession. Many travel experts and industry executives are comparing the current industry upheaval to that of the 9/11 attacks because fear and uncertainty are driving consumer behavior and keeping people at home. It has a 9/11-like feel, Southwest Airlines chief executive Gary Kelly said Thursday on CNBC. He also said that 9/11 wasn't an economically driven issue for travel. It was more fear, quite frankly, and I think that's really what's manifested this time. This week, the International Air Transport Association warned that the outbreak could cost airlines as much as $113 billion in lost revenues. The U.S. Travel Association forecasts that international travel to the U.S. will decline 6% over the next 3 months, the largest drop-off since the 2008 financial crisis. The sector's grim outlook comes as coronaviruses surpass 100,000 worldwide and deaths number in the thousands. The U.S. announced its 14th fatality, and Maryland joined states with confirmed new cases. Meanwhile, health officials have warned against travel to China, Iran, Italy, and South Korea, and the CDC has advised heightened precautions for those traveling to Japan. While there are no restrictions on domestic travel and basic habits like hand washing remain among the best defenses against the flu-like virus, the outbreak has sent global markets into near hysteria. The Dow Jones Transportation Average careened into a bear market this week, meaning stocks have fallen more than 20% from their highs. United and American Airlines stocks are both down about 40% this year, while Delta has shed more than 20%. And from Politico.com, the president seeks to stamp out airline bailout talk. The president sought to squelch talk Wednesday, that would be last week, about any potential bailout for the airline industry. Don't ask that question, please, because they haven't asked that, he answered a reporter during a meeting between airline CEOs and Vice President Mike Pence, who is leading the coronavirus response. So I don't want you to give them any ideas. We haven't discussed that yet. So far, the airline industry has yet to publicly indicate that it wants such a thing, but there is precedent for it. After the 9/11 attacks, President George Bush signed into law a $15 billion package, which lawmakers said at the time was necessary to help keep several major air carriers from collapsing. Airlines for America, the trade group for major U.S. airlines, did not respond to a request for comment. The president's remarks came as business leaders Wednesday also sought to downplay the need for any financial assistance for the airline industry. Instead, they called on Americans to stop canceling conferences and plane tickets, projecting confidence in the travel and airline industry's ability to rebound despite depressed sales. "We don't need any bailouts here," said Tom Donahue, the president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, at a press conference. "There are a lot of regional airlines and others that are critical. If they get in some amount of difficulty, we'd figure out a way to bring assets together to keep them flying. But the bottom line is we're going to run just like business as usual with a little higher heartbeat and get it done." And just in passing, I want to bring up an article from 2 years ago. At the time, it really stuck in my mind. It's from USA Today. American Airlines CEO on September 28th, 2017 said, "We'll never lose money again." The CEO of American Airlines said the once volatile industry has changed so radically that his company will never lose money again. Even in a bad year, Doug Parker says the world's biggest airline should earn about $3 billion in profit before taxes. Parker made the declaration in a meeting with analysts and reporters. From 1978 through 2013, American's cumulative profit was $1 billion. By the end of this year, Parker says the airline will have earned $19 billion in pre-tax income in the last 4 years. Parker admitted it was sometimes difficult to sell this optimism. Many analysts want to see how the airlines fare in a recession. There also is a concern that the carriers are growing too rapidly, driving down fares, and if oil prices rise, the airlines would face another spike in fuel expenses. So I guess we're going to find out how the airlines will fare in a downturn and whether they will remain profitable forever. And from CNN.com, the administration clashes with airline officials over coronavirus. Now, this is a totally different angle I had not heard about. The U.S. aviation industry and the administration are in a pitched battle over the response to the coronavirus pandemic. 3 sources familiar with recent calls between officials from several government agencies and U.S. airlines told CNN. In a series of conversations, agency officials and aviation executives have clashed over the administration's demand that airlines collect new kinds of information from passengers to help officials track potential virus carriers. Airlines say they can't meet that demand right away, a claim some administration officials say they don't believe, according to several sources who tell CNN that calls have deteriorated so badly that agency officials have issued threats, spat expletives, and accused airline executives of lying. "It's an epic battle," said one source familiar with the talks. On one call, an administration official pointed to potential fines if the airlines didn't comply, according to 2 sources. The Federal Register, where proposed rules are published, laid out the new requirements for added data collection and listed penalties that include fines as high as $500,000 as well as jail time of up to a year. CDC officials have even threatened recommending that the administration try to ground planes in the U.S. if they can't get the passenger data, according to one source. The standoff over data goes back years, said one source, who added that the CDC seems to be using the coronavirus outbreak to force airlines to agree to its demands. The broader debate is about what role airlines should play in determining if their passengers have been exposed to the disease. The newest source of friction began a few weeks ago after the president's proclamation in late January that essentially banned any foreign national from entering the U.S. if they had been to China within the previous 2 weeks. In a series of calls, the administration told airlines that they had to comply with a directive to ask travelers if they had been to China within the past 48 hours. CDC had initially wanted passengers to answer 22 fields of information, but narrowed that to 5 questions about passengers' contact info. They're particularly interested in recent visitors to China, Italy, and South Korea. Aviation executives said they don't have the technology to do that digitally, explaining it would take 6 months to make the necessary technical fixes. They could, however, use paper, they said. An official from the CDC accused the airlines of lying, according to 2 of the sources, and of not stepping up to the plate, leaving the industry executives reeling in shock. The demand is a difficult one for airlines for technical reasons as well as privacy issues, particularly in Europe. But during conversations about the new data requirements, CDC officials made a point of telling the airlines about the fines they would have to pay if they did not start complying by mid-March. Before the coronavirus outbreak, airlines were expected to share information they had in their records. The new change means they must collect the information the administration seeks. One airline official told CNN they now feel under the gun to compile the data because the administration could ask for it at any point. Another industry official familiar with the call said, "What may seem simple in a world of apps and other things in which it seems like everyone has information about you, it is not simple." The industry official says it took the U.S. aviation industry 2 years to meet post-9/11 requirements, which also involved data collection. And from Europe, this is from simpleflying.com, Lufthansa to ground entire Airbus A380 fleet. Amid plunging demand due to coronavirus outbreak, Lufthansa is taking some major steps with its A380 fleet. After previously considered grounding its entire A380 fleet, Lufthansa is now preparing to ground the type through May. According to aero.de, Lufthansa is taking the A380 out of service through May per an internal circular. That comes as the airline has seen a slump in bookings. Shockingly, however, Lufthansa has only notched a 35% occupancy rate on the A380s recently, which means they're flying 2/3 empty. At this time, Lufthansa has denied the rumors to Simple Flying, but with plummeting demand, it's looking more likely by the day. In addition, Lufthansa is also working on a plan for its crew and parking the Airbus 380s on top of other aircraft across the Lufthansa group that are effectively grounded. Thus, it would make sense for Lufthansa to not publicly announce the details until the entire plan for this grounding has been confirmed. Currently, Lufthansa has a total of 14 Airbus A380s. Each seats a total of 509 passengers. Around the world, airlines are cutting flights and capacity as global demand for travel plummets. It's unclear exactly how Lufthansa's flight schedule will be impacted with the A380s out of service. However, Lufthansa will likely temporarily suspend some low-performing routes or else reduce capacity. And from an earlier article from simpleflying.com, Virosphere effectively grounds 150 Lufthansa Group aircraft. The Lufthansa Group estimates that around 150 aircraft are now effectively grounded due to the ongoing coronavirus situation. The news follows a similar announcement last week, which only mentioned 23 aircraft. According to information from Plane Spotters, the Lufthansa Group currently has 761 aircraft. However, the German aviation giant is not operating all of these aircraft as certain routes have taken a significant dive in demand. Examples include services to China as well as some shorter routes. Last week, Lufthansa warned that it may need to cancel up to 25% of short-haul and medium-haul flights due to this concern. Now Reuters has learned the true impact. Around 150 aircraft are effectively grounded across the Lufthansa Group. The airline told Simple Flying this includes 125 short-haul aircraft and 25 long-haul aircraft. There are 2 reasons why Lufthansa does not want to operate these flights with significantly reduced load factors. Firstly, because there are fewer paying passengers on the flight, it is far less economical for the flights to run. Secondly, because it is also incredibly irresponsible from an environmental viewpoint to operate half-empty flights. However, it should be noted that these aircraft aren't in fact grounded. Instead, they're simply operating reduced services. What this means is that if the canceled flights were consolidated to as few aircraft as possible, a total of 150 aircraft would not be flying. Also from Europe, from BusinessInsider.com, airlines have wasted thousands of gallons of fuel running empty ghost flights during the coronavirus outbreak because of European rules saying operators can lose their flight slots if they keep their planes on the ground. Demand for flights has collapsed across the globe amid growing fears about the outbreak. Under Europe's rules, airlines operating out of the continent must continue to run 80% of their allocated slots or risk losing them to a competitor. This has led to some operators flying empty planes in and out of European countries at huge cost, the Times of London reported. On Thursday, UK Transport Secretary Grant Shapps wrote to the Airport Coordination Limited asking for the rules to be suspended during the outbreak to prevent further environmental and economic damage. I'm particularly concerned that in order to satisfy the 80-20 rule, airlines may be forced to fly aircraft at very low load factors or even empty in order to retain their slots, Shapps wrote. Such a scenario is not acceptable. It's not in the industry's, the passengers, or the environment's interest and must be avoided. ACL has already suspended the rules for flights to and from Hong Kong and mainland China. However, they remain in effect for all other flights. And coming back to the United States, Southwest Airlines announced enhanced cleaning procedures amid coronavirus concerns. This comes from WTHR.com. That's an Indianapolis TV station. Southwest is working to ease your concerns as the company has announced enhanced cleaning procedures with every flight. Typically, we use an EPA-approved hospital-grade disinfectant in the lavatories and an interior cleaner in the cabin, the company said in a letter issued to Southwest travelers Monday morning. Now we're expanding the use of hospital-grade disinfectant throughout the aircraft, and it will be used in the cabin on elements in the flight deck and in the lavatory. Southwest said these procedures go beyond the standard CDC guidelines. And Southwest Blogs breaks down their cleaning strategies on each flight with a focus on high-touch areas like interior windows, shades, seatbelts, buckles, touch buttons, seat surfaces, tray tables, and armrests. The company also released a video showcasing their cleaning efforts, and I'll include a link to that video in the show notes. And there's a letter from Southwest Chief Marketing Officer Ryan Green. It says, there is no higher priority to our entire Southwest family than the safety of our customers and employees. We're in close communication with medical professionals, the CDC, the WHO, government agencies, and internal teams to stay on top of this evolving situation. According to the most recent information from the CDC, for most people, the immediate risk of being exposed to the virus that causes COVID-19 is thought to be low. We want you to feel confident when traveling with Southwest. As a result, we've enhanced some of our cleaning procedures in the interest of our customers' and employees' health and safety. And here are a couple of the items. It says aircraft cleaning. We spend between 6 and 7 hours cleaning each aircraft every night. And as of March 4th, we have enhanced our overnight cleaning procedures. Typically, we use an EPA-approved hospital-grade disinfectant in the lavatories and an interior cleaner in the cabin. Now we're expanding the use of hospital-grade disinfectant throughout the aircraft, and it will be used in the cabin, on elements in the flight deck, and in the lavatory. And also it says we equipped each of our aircraft with a HEPA, high-efficiency particulate air filter, which filters out recirculated air on board each plane to remove airborne particles. HEPA filters are also used in a hospital to provide patients with clean air. He continues and says we never charge customers a fee to change or cancel their flights, though they do say that fare differences might apply. And as I was writing this show, I received an email from Delta, which they sent out to their customers. Includes a link to an article they posted late last week on their blog called 6 Ways Delta is Supporting Healthy Flyers. And in part, that article says Delta has doubled down on its regular cleaning program while adding a fogging process, often used by the food industry, to disinfect transoceanic aircraft interiors. As transoceanic flights come in, fogging takes place after an initial cleaning, this time with tray tables lowered and overhead bins and lavatory doors open. Seatback entertainment touchscreens are given an extra cleanse using disinfectant wipes. Check-in kiosk. While touchscreens are convenient, they require customers to touch the same surface that others have. That's why we're disinfecting airport kiosk multiple times daily. Customers can always download the Fly Delta app so you can check in from your phone instead. Simply sign in as a guest or create a Delta SkyMiles account for free with no obligation. Gate areas. In addition to the ticket counter and airport lobby area, Delta has increased the cleaning schedule of gate areas, making supplies readily available to our customer service agents for spot or more frequent cleaning and more seat cleaning in the process. Hand sanitizers. Delta is putting hand sanitizers on all ticket counters, boarding gates, need help centers, baggage service offices, and sky clubs, starting with our hub airports, where we serve the highest volume of customers, something employees and customers alike can take advantage of before boarding the aircraft. Amenity kits. These kits for customers on long-haul international flights include hand cleanser or cleaning towelettes. Breathing easier in flight. Aircraft in Delta's fleet feature either a state-of-the-art air circulation system with HEPA filtration or a system that pulls fresh air in from outside to replace cabin air. HEPA air filters extract more than 99.999% of even the tiniest viruses, including coronaviruses. In other information, they say Delta has launched a cross-divisional COVID-19 command center with key leaders and subject matter experts so we can nimbly respond and communicate with employees about evolving CDC and WHO guidance. And they say this week Delta welcomed CDC doctors working on the COVID-19 outbreak to a town hall in Atlanta where employees were able to ask questions and hear from experts. For employees that were not able to attend, Delta leaders are sharing what was learned, and key takeaways were distributed to every Delta employee worldwide. Okay, now let's switch gears and talk about general aviation, starting with aviation trade shows. Aero Friedrichshafen postponed over coronavirus concerns. This comes from AOPA.org. Aero Friedrichshafen, that's the April aviation event in Germany. It's become a rite of spring, and the biggest event in Europe dedicated to general aviation has been postponed indefinitely over concerns about the spread of coronavirus. Approximately 700 exhibitors were registered for the show, which was scheduled for April 1 through 4th when the decision was made to put the event on hold. Officials had held out hopes as long as possible that the Aero Friedrichshafen could proceed despite growing uncertainty, but that changed as the impact of coronavirus 2019 on the worldwide economy became clearer, according to Roland Bosch, a member of Aero Friedrichshafen's executive board, in an email to partners and supporters. For the past few days, we've received increasing number of cancellations and clear signals from our exhibitors and potential visitors, which no longer make it possible to hold the show, he wrote. In addition to these economic reasons, we have a responsibility toward all participants with regard to health protection. This means we've had to postpone Aero Friedrichshafen 2020 to a date that has not yet been fixed. Bosch said those registered for Aero Friedrichshafen will have the option to withdraw from their contracts and be reimbursed for fees already paid, or attend the rescheduled event once a date is set. But here in the U.S., from GeneralAviationNews.com, the 2020 Sun and Fun Aerospace Expo, which kicks off March 31st, is proceeding as planned. We are on, said Greg Gibson, Chief Marketing Officer. While other shows have canceled in the past few days, the Sun and Fun officials say there was never a thought about canceling this year's show. There have been a few exhibitors that have had to cancel due to international travel bans instituted by their companies, Gibson notes. He adds there hasn't been any cancellations by attendees. What there has been is a lot of rumors and speculation and lots of misinformation. The world can't stop because of this, he adds, but we're certainly not taking this lightly. Sun and Fun officials will ramp up the number of places around the campus at Lakeland Airport in Florida where hand sanitizer will be available, including asking all vendors and exhibitors to have hand sanitizer available at their displays. There also will be disinfectant wipes and sprays in common areas and activity spaces. The flying is also providing additional training to its 3,500 volunteers about the increased efforts, as well as dedicating some volunteers to response teams that will be standing by to quickly clean up spills, trash, and other potential hazards. There will also be regular sanitizing of restrooms and food prep areas, which is already standard practice, Gibson noted. And while the fly-in staff and volunteers ramp up efforts, they are also asking those who are planning to attend to also do their part. In a public health and safety newsletter about the coronavirus, Sun and Fun officials describe in detail the correct way to wash hands, as well as other tips to avoid contracting or spreading the virus. Perhaps the most important one is this: you should stay home if you don't feel well, Gibson said. Good advice for all of us. Those who can't make the show this year because of travel bans or illness can still catch all the action by listening to Sun and Fun Radio, available over liveatc.net during the entire fly-in. And of course, the big question, I think, is how will coronavirus affect AirVenture at Oshkosh in late July? My guess is that show will go on, though, of course, a lot could change between now and then. Now let's look at how coronavirus is affecting charter flight companies. From avweb.com, BizJet operators see a COVID-19 bump. This is from March the 1st. Charter operators are reporting a major bump in interest thanks to the spread of COVID-19 as those who can afford it avoid the aerial petri dishes of hub-and-spoke travel. Fortune is reporting that business aircraft operators have seen a major uptick in interest in business in the last couple of weeks as those who have to travel look for safer alternatives to the airlines or to simply get around the growing list of route suspensions. There's undoubtedly been a rise in demand for short-notice, on-demand charter. Adam Twiddle, chief executive officer of jet provider Private Fly, told Fortune, "We've had a very significant number of inquiries for group evacuations and from corporates and individuals. In fact, while BizJet charters rarely fly full, many of the customers are ignoring luxury and packing as many people as they can on the aircraft. The number of private jet requests have gone up, especially on long-haul flights," Insignia U.S. President Richard Lewis told Fortune. "They're not willing to share the cabin with other people. While private aviation is filling a need now, it may not last. Many of those who fly that way are also heavily invested, and the effect of the virus response on the stock market could dampen demand quickly. Quote, any short-term gain is obviously balanced with longer-term concerns and challenges, including the impact on the global economy," Twiddle said. "Even now, while we're seeing short-term additional demand, other clients are changing or canceling their travel plans." And from AINonline.com, Albert Braha with U.S.-based charter broker Apollo Jets told AIN that he's seen a definite spike of around 10% in demand for domestic and international flights. In his view, this is partially due to concerns about the perceived risk of flying with airlines, and he added that many of those making a request are completely new to private charter. However, he confirmed that it has been hard to source aircraft and crew for some of the requested trips. Flight booking platform PrivateFly reported rising demand for short-notice charters directly related to the outbreak. Several of those have involved prospective customers wanting to evacuate groups of people. The company said requests have been coming from clients who had previously flown only by airline, including a decontamination team needing to travel within Asia and a Hong Kong-based family wanting to fly to the Indonesian resort of Bali. And this morning I phoned two of my friends who both run separate charter companies. Interestingly, both of them brought up the topic of cleaning of their aircraft, so that's obviously a new area of emphasis for both of them. And one of them told me that business looks about the same, while the other said that it appears that his business is up slightly. Now let's talk about flight training. From planeandpilotmag.com, coronavirus appears to shut down 3 flight schools in the Atlanta area. 3 flight schools in Atlanta, Georgia have reportedly shut down amid fears of the spread of the coronavirus, though that version of the story is not the sole take on it. The closing of Falcon Aviation Academy flight training programs in Newnan, Peachtree City, and Athens was reported by the Newnan Times-Herald. The story by Sarah Faye Campbell reports that the program closings appear to be connected to the outbreak of the coronavirus in China. The students were part of a December class of pilot students who traveled to the U.S. to train for careers as pilots in China. There are no reports of any cases of the virus related to the suspension of the training classes. While the suspension affected mostly Chinese flight students, numerous instructors were also laid off. One report estimated that around 90% of the company's employees, set to number around 300, were let go by the company. While Falcon Aviation Academy did not return our request for comment, it has been widely reported that flight activity in China has been dramatically reduced as the country tries to stop the spread of the disease. According to reports in several mainstream news outlets, China-based airlines are furloughing thousands of pilots in the wake of the air travel partial shutdown, hence the speculation that the sponsoring Chinese companies might have pulled the plug on the training at the Falcon locations in the Atlanta area. It's also been a bad past few weeks for the company. Earlier this month, former Falcon Aviation Academy CEO Raymond Sluck died along with 3 other people in the crash of a Citation 501 after takeoff from Atlanta's Falcon Field in wintry weather conditions. And from CNBC.com, United postpones a new pilot class and warns of additional flight cuts amid coronavirus outbreak. United Airlines is postponing start dates for some new pilots this month and warned about further flight reductions, the carrier confirmed. A 23-person class of pilots that was supposed to start training this week has been postponed. CNBC had reported the schedule change earlier on Sunday. The delay comes as the COVID-19 outbreak spreads, prompting United and its competitors to scale back some international routes. Pilot training can take several months before aviators start flying for the airline. Yeah, I would say more than several months. Airlines have ramped up their pilot hiring in recent years as they face increased demand and more pilots near the federally mandated retirement age of 65. Earlier this month, United announced the purchase of a flight training academy, which is called the United Aviate Academy, to train its future pilots. Quote, "We're on track to open the United Aviate Academy later this year, and our plan to hire more than 10,000 pilots by 2029 remains unchanged," the United spokeswoman said. And of course, the flying schedule for my flight school was lighter than usual today. I texted a friend on the East Coast and asked him what air traffic was like at his airport, and he said it's a little slower, but not noticeably slower, perhaps due to the fact that we have had really bad weather all winter, and it's finally good weather now. So that's an overview of how the coronavirus is impacting aviation today. The situation is likely to change in the future, and when it does, we'll bring you more updates. Again, if you haven't done so already, please click the subscribe button in whatever app you're listening to us now. That way you'll get notified when new shows are available. And of course, it doesn't cost a thing to hit the subscribe button, so please do it now. And this is a listener-supported show, so please check out our Patreon site and consider becoming a supporter of the show. I strive to add a couple of new supporters every month because we lose a few supporters each month when people don't update their credit card or drop out because of changes in their finances. So if you find value in this show or any of our other shows, please sign up to donate a few dollars every month via your credit card by going to our Patreon site at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, because you're all awesome listeners. Or you can make a one-time or monthly donation via PayPal by going to aviationnewstalk/PayPal. And finally, please take a moment to show your aviation friends how they can get the Aviation News Talk podcast. And if they don't know what a podcast is, it's easy to just send them out to the Apple App Store or the Google Play Store, where they can download our dedicated Aviation News Talk podcast apps for iOS and Android. In the App Store, just have them search for Aviation News Talk, 3 separate words. And did I mention? Yes, of course, those apps are free. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.